name is Shirley Carduck, and last year, it was on April 22nd, 2014, I was at the hospital at a meeting and I had left. I worked there. It was around 10 in the morning and I was to meet a friend for breakfast. And as I was leaving the hospital, instead of going right like I normally would, I turned left for some unknown reason. But I kept going, and as I came up to the entrance of the hospital where the intersection is, there were cars and trucks on both sides of the road. And I didn't see an accident or anything, but I saw people running over to the edge of the road and looking down the embankment. So I pulled over just to see if I could help. And when I looked over the edge, there was a man in a truck had gone down over the embankment, and the men that were standing down there near the truck were yelling that he's not breathing. So I ran down, and this gentleman was sitting in his truck, very purple, ghastly color, wasn't breathing, had no pulse. So the gentleman helped me get him out of the truck, and we got him on the ground, and I started CPR, hands-only CPR. And it was very grueling. I felt like I was doing CPR for 15, 20 minutes, it seemed like, and I asked God for strength to continue, and I really felt the strength going into my body and continued on with the CPR. It seemed like maybe really a half an hour. It just seemed like it was going on forever, and I yelled for someone. There were people looking down watching, and I asked if anybody could help, if they knew CPR, and nobody came. So I continued CPR and thought I just couldn't go another minute, and was just wondering where the ambulance was because the hospital was just a few hundred yards up the street. But someone that worked at the hospital came running down the hill and said, "Shirley, I can help," and he continued CPR. A police officer showed up with an AED. We hooked him up and shocked the patient and continued CPR. And then the paramedics finally arrived. I got a phone call from the hospital stating that the gentleman was alive and breathing on his own, and I just lost it because I could not believe that this man, who was just as purple when I left as when I started, I just didn't think that he was going to make it. I thought he was dead when I left. So it was a big surprise, a nice surprise. I actually was his nurse in the hospital a few days later. He had suffered a heart attack and passed out behind the wheel, and that's when the accident occurred. A few weeks ago I did meet up with him, and he is alive and doing great. He's back to work, he's home with his family. Things are going really well for him. And even though I, as a critical care nurse, helped in saving lives over the last 30, 35 years, I was always in a hospital with a lot of people around, doctors, nurses, the IV team. We have medicines and machines that can keep people alive, but this was out on my own, and all I had were my hands. If you could just learn one thing, or if we could all just learn one thing from this, is hands-only CPR really does work. Even though the person's not breathing and you're not giving them mouth to mouth, you're circulating the blood, which still has a lot of oxygen in it. So we just have to deliver that oxygen to the brain. So everybody should learn CPR because someday you may need to use it on a loved one.
I'm Marie Mulvihill, Executive Director of the United Way of Mifflin Juniata. I began volunteering with United Way in 1982 and joined the staff in 2000. On March 27, 2014, a fire broke out in the Juniata Terrace area that affected 27 homes. The fire began in early evening, and it was posted on local Facebook pages, so I knew the fire was significant. And early the next day, I called the American Red Cross, and we connected, and I went up to the Juniata Terrace area and began working with families and other nonprofits and organizations in our community to meet the needs of all those people that had been affected by the fire. The American Red Cross award that I received for the efforts around the Juniata Terrace fire really belonged to the whole community. There needs to be a tremendous amount of credit that went out to the firefighters and emergency responders that were there right as the event took place. And then a local community bank called right away, and we were able to establish a place for people to donate money. I also helped coordinate the actual physical donations of clothes and goods that came in with the Goodwill services in our area, as well as local churches. And we talked to the fire victims, which there were a lot, with the families, and worked with the Red Cross to get them immediate attention and settled into some temporary housing until they could find some more permanent resources. The community was very generous during this event and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the United Way was the location for the fire victims to come and pick up the donations. As the monetary gifts came in, we would allocate them based on family size and give them out immediately. So families who needed things right away could begin purchasing things with the money. Others had insurance and were able to use the money that was given to them to help buy a new house or find a new apartment and pay the first month's rent. One of the things that the Red Cross Service Award recognized us for was that the United Way staff would stay after hours to meet with the customers and the fire victims because they all worked and they had different hours. So we tried to be as accommodating as we could. And while I'm the face of the award, it really belongs to everyone who participated with this. The Juniata Terrace fire was very challenging because it was row homes. The fire started in a kitchen, and because the homes were built in the 1920s, the same standard of code that we have today was not there. So one house quickly caught fire with the next house, and it became a huge fire very quickly. What was most astounding, I think, about our community response to this was within hours, all of those people who were displaced found some place to stay, whether it was with another family member or a friend. The Red Cross had to put very few people up in hotels, and those in hotels quickly found new housing with friends and family. So just the immediate response and bonding and support was just tremendous. I'm very proud to be part of that community.
Robin's grandmom, and last year I went down to Robin's house and asked her if she'd like to go for a bike ride with me, and Robin said yes. So we got ourselves all ready, got on our bikes, put our helmets on, and we headed down Scotia Road. As we're going down Scotia Road, I thought it would be real neat if we made a right-hand turn onto a road that I guess was used many years ago called Mahala. And all the way down that street, there is someone that lives down there. So we went down there, we turned around, we came back, and on the way back, Robin was ahead of me. So I looked up off the road to see how Robin was doing, and Robin was doing fine. After that, time ended. So Robin can continue.
All right, after she fell off the bike, I turned around and immediately got off of my bike. I ran over to her, not knowing if she was unconscious or if she just fell off the bike, and I noticed that she was on the ground and she was bleeding. So I ran back to my bike because we both had bandanas in case we got stuff in our faces, and I wrapped the bandana around what was bleeding, which was her elbow. I noticed that the bone was sort of protruding, and I held it and wrapped it together tightly to make sure to stop the blood. I kept asking her if she was all right, and she came to, but her eyes were going all over the place. I didn't know exactly what to do, but I realized that it wasn't right, and I called my mom, who was all freaked out and worried about it. She just got out of the shower, and she was like, "Where are you? Where are you?" I didn't exactly know where we were because we were on some side road, and we were in Scotia to begin with, which was a mess. And she called the cops, who were trying to contact me, and we were trying to figure out where we were, and somehow they figured out that we were in Scotia Range in some side road. I remember that she kept trying to stand up and say, "Help me up, Robin, help me up," and that's not what you're supposed to be doing. I kept trying to tell her, "You need to stay down, you're injured." She didn't know what was going on. She kept saying she's all right and to help her up and get to the bike, and she's very stubborn, and I had to make sure she stayed down, and I held together the bandana, which was folded over 4 times, but it kept bleeding through all over my hand and my clothes. And then soon my dad showed up in his van, and we got some neck supports and some blankets out of the car to help keep her comfortable, I guess, on the ground. and a couple minutes later the ambulance showed up and she was taken away to the hospital. I learned a lot about first aid and what to do in situations like this from classes I've taken at the YMCA and health classes I've taken over the years, and I know that you have to keep pressure on the wound and to keep them down when they're like having a possible concussion or seizure.
Had I been on my own, I didn't really realize what had happened to me and how bad I was. And I probably would have fallen over and become dizzy and just laid there for a long, long time if it weren't for Robin. So I owe her a lot of gratitude. I had this silly helmet on my head, and the helmet is cracked here and here and here. So it could have been a lot worse. I did have a major concussion, but I'm sure it would have been much worse if I hadn't worn a helmet. So I owe a lot to Robin and her fast thinking and her skills that she's picked up.
Hi, my name is Josh Cohn. I am the Healthy Living Director here at the State College YMCA. I have worked here for about 15 years or so, on and off a little bit. I play for a living and I love what I do. I love where I work. It can be kind of crazy sometimes, but it's awesome. And I've had some awesome opportunities here to learn and grow. And recently, those CPR classes, that training has come into play in my life through my work. And I had a gentleman a couple months ago, back I think in November 2014, had a heart attack while he was finishing up working out on a treadmill, and he stopped the treadmill, went to step back, and he collapsed. And so I was about 15, 20 feet away when it happened, staring right at him the whole time from when he stopped to when he collapsed. So after I realized that something was happening, I had a coworker dial 911, and that coworker as well handed the phone to somebody else as he was dialing 911, grabbed the AED and ran over while I had started performing CPR with a coworker. My coworker Kathy, we're thinking about you, Kathy, and praying for you. And she responded and helped me out start CPR on this gentleman once we realized that he was indeed unresponsive and no signs of life or anything. That we started CPR, went back and forth, did a two-person CPR rescue. Suzanne and Christina, they set up the AED, were able to apply the pads, and within just a matter of a couple minutes, we delivered, we analyzed them, the AED analyzed them, and concluded that it needed to deliver a shock, and we shocked, the AED shocked them, and that first shock knocked them back into a somewhat normal rhythm. I'm just so thankful that our YMCA here at State College Y invested in those AEDs and put them in several different locations in our building, and that way the importance of having a prompt response in a situation like that, looking at a man and his life hanging in the balance, and it's just a matter of seconds. It comes down to seconds that these type of things, how fast you respond, and the importance of responding quickly and efficiently. And having the AED now, the technology is amazing that it analyzes, yes, it needs a shock, or no, it doesn't need a shock. And being able to deliver that shock was life-saving. Roy is here to this day because of that technology.
I mean, it was just the three of us, Kathy and I and Josh, were just kind of kept on going and alternating breathing, compressions. The defibrillator kept checking, didn't need any more of a rhythm, and we just kind of continued to do it until the EMTs got there. I don't know exactly how long that was. I remember them walking in the door and I felt a huge sense of relief because I was happy that they were going to take over, but they told me to continue, and I was kind of like, oh, but they had all the equipment. But eventually, once there was a break in the cycle, they did take over. We had a staff meeting that next day with my staff, because I always say with the amount of members that we have at our facility, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Something will happen. I've never had something happen to this extreme, but I think it was a good dose of just, applying training, other than, it's kind of made me rethink how we train our staff and how we make sure they are obviously certified, which they have to be, but just doing drills and making sure they're aware of what to do in a situation like this. And then, really, there were 3 of us there at the same time, which happened to be, you couldn't ask for a better situation, but we do have times when staff are by themselves and they do need to be able to delegate and say, you do this, you call 911, and then just use your skills. I mean, the defibrillator really is an easy tool to use. It tells you exactly what to do. You just have to be able to, know how to use it and be trained how to use it.
My name is Ryan Etzel. I am a volunteer EMT with Center Lifelink EMS. I've been volunteering with Lifelink for about 5 years now. So I have a full-time job doing something completely different during the week, usual Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 kind of job. So my volunteer hours are usually on the weekends and in the evenings if there are excess calls that go out that need coverage. And really why I do it, I've always been someone who has the luck, whether you call it good luck or bad luck, of finding people who are in need, whether it be a car wreck, some children who were lost or something like that. And I've always wanted to actually be able to help them instead of just standing there calling somebody else and waiting for some other help to arrive there. So that's what was the initial push for me to work with EMS and search and rescue and everything else in the area in order to be able to actually help those people in their time of need versus waiting for somebody else to show up with that. So I think that throughout the past 5 years of volunteering with Lifelink, I've been thrown into a multitude of situations where every situation we walk into is going to be completely different from one call to the next, from one shift to the next. And I think that's what has been really rewarding, is just being able to give back a little bit to the community and to help people whenever they need it the most. For example, if we come upon a car accident and there are several people involved, or some family members involved, we can reassure those their relatives and their friends who are with them that they are going to receive the best of care and that they are receiving the best of care, and that we are going to make sure they have the best outcome possible. The Red Cross Award that I've been nominated for, I'm very thankful to have been nominated for it, and I'm told that I've had the most volunteer hours in the past year with Center Lifelink, but at the same time, it's just what I do anymore. I come in, I do my work, I try to do a good job with everybody else and support the team and get our job done. And whether it means that I get the most hours or not, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm just really looking to help the community. Been a very, very rewarding opportunity to be able to work with everybody in the public safety sector within Center County and the surrounding area as well. It's been an all-volunteer effort for myself, and it's also been a very rewarding and gratifying effort to be able to be part of an amazing team in the area. We have some very dedicated personnel who put their lives on the line every day for the community, whether it be fire, police, EMS, search and rescue, or even the call takers and the dispatchers at the 911 center. Everybody works together to really help the community and to truly help people who are having the worst days of their lives. Our goal is to just be able to make that day just a little bit better, and I believe that we've been able to succeed with that.
Been in the service for about 10 years. 7 years of that's been active duty. My platoon sergeant, while I served in Iraq, nominated me for this for some things I did while I was overseas. Basically, I see it as I just did my job. There was a convoy that was going down. They were driving down. I believe it was, we called it Route Sword, and the MRAPs are really hard to drive. And if you're not an experienced driver, it can be quite a challenge to drive that. And there was a very inexperienced driver driving that vehicle at the time, and it started to sway and go back and forth, and the driver didn't know how to recover from that, and it ended up rolling over. And there was a gunner they stand out of the top, and they're designed to come apart. If they're hit or they roll over, they're designed to fly apart. Upon arriving on the scene, there was like 6 casualties, 3 of which were pretty bad. The one had some real severe crush injuries from the waist down. Another one had some internal abdominal injuries, and the third one he had some pretty bad head trauma. All of them were kind of out of it. The 2 medics that were on the scene, I remember them just being, they were like kids. Couldn't have been any older than 19, 20 years old. They were so panicked that, they were so afraid they weren't doing their job right. Kind of looking around and nothing was happening the way it was supposed to happen, the way you were trained. And I can remember seeing the helicopters coming in, and I could hear them on the radio from one of the lieutenants that was walking around trying to decipher like what he was going to do next. And I could hear them, the pilots, saying they couldn't find us, they couldn't see us. So I can remember grabbing hold of this lieutenant and telling him, we needed to get to pop smoke, we needed to identify where we were at. And from there I just kind of took over the whole scene. Like I didn't care anymore of who had what rank or who didn't. I knew what needed done, and it was just my training. It kind of kicked in. I believed in my training. I trained hard. I believed in the people that trained me, but I wasn't sure how I was going to react once I was put in that situation. And it's one of the greatest things that came out of that day. Like I said, it was the best and the worst day for a medic. You never want to have a casualty to take care of, but we train to take care of patients. So when you get the opportunity to do that, and you can do it correctly and you do it well, it's a real rewarding feeling. After that, a medic, you always want to be called Doc. And after that day, and still to this day, 6 years later, they still call me Doc. It was very, very avoidable if they would have just used a little bit of caution, a little bit more training. That's why we train. That's why we are young soldiers. Us as leaders, it's our job to protect them and to train them and to ensure that they know how to do the job that we ask them to do before we ask them to do that job, especially in a combat situation.
Worked for the department for the last 20 years, and Bob Bradley and I worked together for 19 years together. We worked together on Alpha Platoon for many years, on and off night shift because we all cycle through that. And I had the good fortune of being his sergeant for the last 3 years prior to the incident. And Bob was always a guy that you could rely on. He was the guy that you would call when you wanted someone that was going to remain calm, be able to talk somebody through a crisis, somebody that wasn't going to get overly emotional, be able to think through the problem and handle the situation in the most professional manner. Bob was extremely reliable in that regard, and often someone we looked toward when we had a difficult situation. He was a member of the crisis intervention team that handles calls where people are in crisis, whether it's from a mental health issue or just a sudden crisis that they're going through. Because his demeanor was such that he was able to relate to people very, very well, not as an authority figure, but as somebody who was compassionate and caring about their problems. And he was very, very good at that. I think that is what really set Bob apart from some of us. Bob was just gifted in that regard.
Yeah, I miss Bob very much. I was nervous about doing this interview because I wasn't sure if I could get through it. But, he was just the type of guy that every day would make you smile and was never negative about anything. Super optimistic. Mm-hmm. Somebody that could, when you passed them during the day, made your day better. And I worked with Bob for 16 years. And I can say honestly that in 16 years, never was he anything but kind to me. And I've never seen him be anything but kind to anybody else in that time. So, you know, I think that this is a huge loss to the department and the community. And Bob was just one of those guys that was always calm, could think his way through anything. What I also want to say about Bob is that his family was his number one priority. You know, his kids and his wife meant the world to him. You know, he was always yelling, "I love Jessica." We have a video of him from a Canada trip that my husband went on with him, a fishing trip, and they were recording themselves boating and trying to catch fish, but I don't think they caught anything. But Bob decided to yell, "I love Jessica," as loud as he could because it echoed where they were. It was kind of very isolated. And, you know, I watched the video after Bob had passed, and I just thought he was just such a loving person and a fun person, you know. And so his family was definitely number one for him. And then not only that, but he would always ask about my family and everybody that he worked with, all his coworkers. What was going on with their families was also important to Bob. You know, he always wanted to know how my kids were. He always wanted to know what sports they were involved in, and was never too busy to stop and listen to a story about a 10-year-old baseball game, you know. I'm saying that Bob being gone is surreal. It's just been a few months, but honestly, I keep expecting him to walk through the door and tell a joke, because if we didn't mention, he had the best sense of humor ever, dry, so you could hardly ever tell if he was telling a joke or being serious. And I know he's going to be sorely missed by everybody here at our department. He had some very long-time friends that work here with us also. Drew Sim is an officer. And from what I understand, Drew and Bob were friends since junior high, and they used to call it the Bob and Drew Show because, you know, they both have a great sense of humor and are very funny people to work with. I know Drew misses Bob very much. I know that he was a big part of Drew's family, and vice versa. So Drew will be there for Bob's family, you know, throughout this time.